The new propaganda news. This presentation is based on Edward Bernay's chapter on his book Propaganda. So first I will start it with the quote. You guys can just read it, but it will take about like 2 minutes for me to spend it on this exact quotation as my introduction to why I choose this topic. So first, it talks about the key words that stands out for me. It would be leaders, power, the masses, approval of the masses, propaganda, and the last phrase, therefore propaganda is here to stay. It introduces the topic how leaders were once, or authority people in power, or was the one in control of their people, and introduced to them of what they ought to like and what they ought to follow, and based of aristocracy group of people. But now what Bernice is saying is propaganda must connect or relate to the masses in order for it to have increasing power to people and to prove its message to be true. Even though it is not, whether or not it is true, as long as the masses approves the message, it is a powerful propaganda. So the second part that I'm talking about is Bernice's background. Edward Bernays was an American pioneer in public relations. He's very known for his theory and his work in social science, but most importantly, the way he integrates Sigmund Freud's theory in psychology, Freud's idea, and propaganda connects to his inspiration to write about ego and analyze a distinguished group of people, like men and women, and how they relate to the message of propaganda. The following is the quote that's the part of the quote that stands out most to me is the propaganda is here to stay. And this particular quote, I would say that it is still relevant since Bernice's time, that from before propaganda is used in the wartime, as it had this negative connotation of trying to influence the masses to believe. The following is the lack of evidence. Well, now this particular phrase refers to how society don't really realize that it is propaganda. Like the vaccine, and how on a bus stop it would say, get your vaccine for our business to continue, which is propaganda, basically. Any marketing or advertising that targets people and their opinion, that trying to get approval of the masses to believe, is what Bernay is saying as the reference to his point about how propaganda is here to stay. And to social organization, this gains more public support because it is trying to say that from his time period until now, no matter which time period, there will be a message from a particular group of people trying to influence others who are not yet belong to that group to believe to their message. It is powerful, yet it is debatable whether or not it could be true, depending on the message that is trying and the public that is trying to convince. The next slide, I'll be talking about the 3 pages of the chapter where he went on and talked about monarchy and how the bourgeoisie in his time in the US, particularly in the West, how they lose that power because of the civilized society that composed more of the bourgeoisie class. The bourgeoisie will be either anyone who in particular influential but not necessarily rich, but they are the masses, they are the public, any citizen who in a class aside from aristocratic family are the ones were the ones his point was trying to refer to. So it talks about the part where it says the modern propaganda endures effort to create or shape events to influence the relations of the public to an enterprise, idea, or the group, because any society, whether it is social, religious, or political, is possessed of certain beliefs and sets out to make them known, is practicing propaganda. The part where he introduced the monarch was actually at the beginning, where he says that the economic power tends to grow after its political power, and the history of industrial revolution shows how the power passed from the king and aristocracy to the bourgeoisie. The 1928 is the industrial era, but most likely the post-industrial era between it's after World War One and the beginning of World War, and almost like the beginning of World War Two. So this part is when the class centers more to the working people, those who takes over the population, because most importantly in the Europe it is most likely either a monarch or an empire. But that was back then in the 18th, 16th, 17th century, and the centuries before that. It is slowly declining, and the people in the working class actually want to take up more of the power and how their opinion actually starts to have the voice in society. So democracy tends to lean towards the citizens, and the king and queen are changed to become in constitution instead of monarch and absolutism. So Bernay's point about propaganda is still relevant until today. I'll use their current. The most recent example would be how our leaders from a public health would have their own opinion about the vaccine, while the public opinions would also have their own. So by using propaganda on advertising, like public places like public transportation, bus stop, malls, billboards, internet, most likely platforms on social media, they would gain the power from the public's approval. Using advertisements such as get your vaccine dose to get back to the business, or let's say if you want more information about the vaccine, go to this website. I'll also say that this quantitative representation shows how people with the second dose are more likely able to not get the virus or have really mild symptoms even if they get it. And all this result from all billboards, internet, most likely platforms on social media, they would gain the power from the public's approval. Using advertisements such as get your vaccine dose to get back to the business, or say if you want more information about the vaccine, go to this website. I'll also say that this quantitative representation shows how people with the second dose are more likely able to not get the virus or have really mild symptoms even if they get it. And all this result from the ideas coming from the leaders in the public health slowly gets into people's mind that yes, we need to get the vaccine, such as similar to how they would use posters about how more men we need to do this and that, and how his videos on the camps shows that the camps are actually fine, it's not killing anybody, and show it to people who try to oppose building up that camp. And that's an example of propaganda trying to change people's idea, to make them more to gain their trust and believing that it is true. So this part of the slide that talks about the public interest, how it inspires propaganda in modern society, and how influential citizens display propaganda, good or negative, to the public. We'll be using as an example again for the other slides that's coming. But this one, it visual representation of how the dogs and the families behind the words dog is an example of us, people in power, is trying to treat that dog through the obedience training. So such as in propaganda, how the leaders are trying to get a hold of us to believe on their platforms. And here again, our interviewer says, listen to me, I know better. And this example is a question. It is not particularly trying to relate to the to propaganda itself, personal reflection of how our opinions over a label of a product, does it really matter? I mean, does the opinion that we have on the product matters? Or we just read what it says and not dig deeper or do more research on the product, but immediately it already caught us into believing it is true, and we end up buying that product because of the promises and it's written on its label. For last part of Bernay's chapter 2, he used how mills of housewives, who feel that manufactured foods deleterious to health should be prohibited, but there is little chance that their individual desires will be translated into effective legal form unless they have expressed demand on the organized, made vocal, and concentrated upon the state legislature or upon the federal Congress some mode which will produce the results they desire. And by the end it says like how the intelligent minorities finally have their own voice in that propaganda that shapes how the new propaganda is now targets distinguished group of people. Legislature has negative effect on health. So on the very last part of Bernay's chapter 2, the page 31, it talks about minorities. And as I said, intelligent minorities, the way he lined that one is very interesting, because he is not saying that minorities are I would say vulnerable. He don't use any words that makes them sound weak. Instead, he used intelligent. So it says here, but clearly it is the intelligent minorities which need to make use of propaganda continuously and systematically. And this paragraph until the last part, the very last paragraph, says, but there are usually proponents and opponents of every propaganda, about whom are equally eager to convince the majority, contradicts intelligent minorities to convince the majority. That is exactly what the housewives are trying to do. They're a distinguished minority of women, and in our time we see last year's summer how the Black Lives Matter is an example of intelligent minorities who finally found their voice and convinced successfully the public. Another one is another question that I'm trying to tackle. This question is my own reflection to myself based on reading this chapter 2. The ongoing movements in North America have used propaganda ever since the residential school to the French and the Anglo fight of the land to Canada, or there is a promised land for you here. People from Eastern Europe or any parts of the Europe would migrate because it's a free land. Canada says it's a free land, you can plant. When they come here, they start from the bottom. There's really not good crops. Like they have to do it on their own. And is it really effective when organized only to reach the public opinions? Or like the vaccine is not to reach the public opinion. Like opinion of the public doesn't really matter. We have to get it. We have to be convinced. It's not whether we believe it or not. We are going to get it. We are forced. And this facts that's being displayed to us is not whether or not we believe it, but it's the truth because they know better. So by the end, I conclude that Edward Bernays' Chapter 2, No Propaganda, he wrote this on the time where industrial revolution and pre-World War II era, it is still relevant in our society. And his point does not necessarily mean that propaganda is used to gain the trust of the people to their approval, but instead it is also a tool. It is a tool for minorities to finally find their voice and to finally have their own platform and to deliver their concerns, since all those times they've been silenced. Thank you.